working, and I have been out reaching out to our universities and other public colleges, and we're trying to pull together a consortium where we can, as a group, with the variety of programs that we have, work with industry, our government sectors to be able to pathway students seamlessly using lean organization principles into your organizations and have them supervised and supported so that they get that experience that it's so important to translate the didactic to the actual performance and reality. So we're working with Central, we're working with the University of Washington, we're working with Western, and WSU as well, and our community college system. So we are putting one foot in front of the other. But with that, I would just like to have a round of applause for our panel and all of you.
She received her interdisciplinary doctorate in computer security at the University of Alaska Fairbanks. And after working as an engineer at the Jet Propulsion Laboratory, Dr. Amelia Phillips began working with e-commerce sites. And she began training in computer forensics and investigations during the dot-com boom. She, here at Highline, has designed our certificate, our AAS, and now our BAS in computer forensics and cybersecurity. I understand that there is no textbook. She's written it, though. And she also travels quite a bit for us and does consulting in Namibia and South Africa and around the world. And the one last thing that I should highlight is the fact that she is the regional director for what is called the Pacific Rim Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition. And we are invited to, at the end of the day here, tour the cybersecurity lab here on campus. And so you have a real treat in store as I welcome and introduce my colleague, Dr. Amelia Phillips.
Yes, Meg and I got to suffer through getting our doctorates together. That's always a fun adventure. So I'm here to talk about cybersecurity and global supply chain management. So I'm going to give you an overview, talk about firmware, software, new technology, infrastructure. Some of these things you may already be familiar with. I don't know all of your backgrounds, and some of this may be new to you. So I'd like to start off with back in the day. So when I started as an engineer, after being at JPL, I went and worked at TRW, working on ballistic missiles. And so what would happen is Rockwell Autonetics Division would write the software, and then they'd send it over, the Air Force would, to TRW, and we'd verify the software, and we'd say, yes, this is going to do what it's supposed to do. So how does that really work in today's world? So that's some of the stuff that we need to consider. So the internet was never designed to be secure. So remember, this was mainly to get messages. This was to communicate back during the Cold War. So all the things that we now have on the internet were never really thought about or totally conceived back when this was first being put together. Okay, so let's start with our firmware. So the thing that fascinates me is that we have to consider who's producing the CPUs, your chipsets, your motherboards, all of those electronic devices that are then going to go into your military aircraft, your commercial aircraft, your smartphones. All of these things are being produced in various countries where you as a manufacturer may or may not have complete control, and somebody, as you see, can go ahead and produce that firmware complete with malware already on the firmware, so on the circuit boards. So what are we going to do? Some countries, such as India, Japan, and even ourselves, are like, well, we're only going to use stuff that was manufactured domestically, where we have control. So what does that do to global trade? That means that, well, those poorer countries, developing countries that are now creating these chipsets, CPUs, et cetera, can't export to anyone. So what does that mean? What are we going to have to do in order to deal with all of those things? The other things we'll take a look at are our cars and our laptops, et cetera. So you deal with firmware, then we have to look at our software. So you have companies trying to make a buck during an economic downturn. So you start cutting corners, or you start going, okay, we can use the commercial off-the-shelf software, we can use open source. And I love Linux. I swear by Linux, I use it all the time. But you've got developers everywhere. You've got to look at all of these applications that are being created and look at how they're going to interface with your systems and verify them. Then you've got to deal with, who are you outsourcing to? Who are these companies that are doing the software for you? Who's qualifying them? Then you may end up with design and implementation errors. It's like they designed it to do what you told them to do, but then when you actually put all of these things together, errors pop up, unexplained items. So you're having to address some of those items. So we start looking at the supply chain risk issues. You've designed this stuff properly, you have everything in place, then you've got a new contractor because the other company went out of business or the people retired or whatever. You've got new threat vectors because, of course, now you've got all this new technology, and it's like, oh, that opened up a vulnerability we hadn't thought about before. So with all this new hardware and new software, what's going to happen? And then, of course, you have all of these distributed software systems that your vendors and suppliers and everybody else have to be on. So where are all these vulnerabilities? And they're going to be in places that you have no control over. So also next, we look at our critical infrastructure, our utilities. I was at a meeting earlier this year where the gentleman talked about the solar flares and what happens. What happens to our power grid? So those are things that have to be looked at. Police, fire department, emergency response, your hospitals. How long can a hospital stay up and running if there's no power? How many generators do they have to have? How soon are you going to run out of gasoline to power the generators? So you have all of these things that are involved, and when you look at it, it's all based on these electronic gadgets that make our lives convenient. Okay, so NIST, so the National Institute of Standards and Testing, has a new document out. I'm not sure if many of you have already taken a look at it. Okay, so they've got one. It's in draft. It's in the draft and response phase, I think, right now. So you might want to go out and take a look at it on supply chain risk management. So it begins by looking at threats and vulnerabilities, and then by looking at those, you're then going to go into what's the probability and likelihood of these things occurring. From that, you can go, okay, if these are probable, what are the impacts to our systems? And from there, you're going to look at your degree of risk and then start making plans to mitigate those. So again, NIST looks at the communications technology, supply chain risk management, and as is what's happening in many of the things that have to do with computers and electronic devices, it's going to be multidisciplinary. It's not just limited to the IT staff. You've also got to look at management, you've got to look at the business processes. All of those things are going to come into play. So first you've got to, as you look on this continuous cycle, you've got to frame what's your actual problem. You then are going to have to assess what's going on. From there, you're going to respond to that assessment. Okay, this is what we need to do. And then you're going to monitor and see, okay, did we get the results we want? Have we been able to control it? And then you go back through the process again. So this is going to be sort of never ending. Our next problem that we have is legislature. People keep trying to introduce new laws, new technologies, and it's not just here in the United States, it's worldwide. So each country is going to try and put together laws that are going to protect their infrastructure, their corporations, their government processes. But how do these all work together? So you need to start looking at this from more of a global standard. So there's one right now that's being proposed in our legislature, in the House. So the Cyber Intelligence Sharing and Protection Act. So that is one where industry and government are sharing cyber threats and knowledge of those. So this means you've got to have people in the industries who are cleared to see certain types of information, working with government personnel that know what they can and cannot share with industry, what is national security, and what actually is for the greater good. So you start having to form all of these alliances that are going to make this work. The European cybersecurity strategy, so the EU has actually put one together. It's sort of working, but again, they've got their area to protect their own personal countries and then the EU as a whole. So all of these things are going on. And in the meantime, you're putting together all this legislation and technology is just going gangbusters. How often can you get a new smartphone?
Every other day.
Yes, okay, so it's like, my cell phone does what? Okay, so it gets to be interesting. So first thing I'm gonna, okay, let's take a look at this. This is one of my favorite ones. If you put in Cisco Internet of Things visualization, okay, it said during 2008, the number of things connected to the internet exceeded the number of people on Earth. So by 2020, there are going to be 50 billion items online, on the internet. And what in the world are we going to do? How do you actually secure all of that if you've got 50 billion things? And I like what they show. Your car is going to say, you need to get up 10 minutes early because you've got to stop for gas. And your refrigerator is going to go ahead and say, you're out of eggs, and it's already ordered your groceries and already billed your checking account, by the way. There's a really cool article out there called The Fridge Did It. It's great. It's hysterical. You're just like, okay, yeah, this is real. And LG does already have one of those refrigerators out there.
And what does it do?
It'll actually tell you that you're out of eggs, so your eggs have to be in a certain spot. It'll tell you that, your lettuce has wilted, so I've ordered you new lettuce, or whatever. It's and you're out of milk. So there's all of these things that already exist. I got the wrong one. Wrong place, sorry. Okay, this is going to drive me nuts. I love computers. God dang it.
Coming from you.
I always tell my students, you have to be more tenacious than the machine. And I've been saying that for way too long. Yes, when I was an engineer, when I was becoming an astronautical engineer, I was like, I will never, ever, ever go into computer science. So here I am now.
Never say never.
Exactly. Okay, so there are more things than people online. And the one thing that is going to make all of this where people aren't going to want to get online is the lack of security. So we have to look at the triad. So here's the other CIA. So confidentiality, meaning we want to make sure that only the people that need to look at it can, that the hackers aren't getting in and looking at your private stuff. Integrity of your data, so that means that you're not going to restore a backup and it's useless, and that has happened. I've had credit unions where their backups were completely useless, and they're like, well, at least we have a secondary backup, but it's going to take us a week to get a hold of that. So they're out of business for a week. Accessibility, meaning that people that need to get a hold of that data can get a hold of that data. So that's what we have to take a look at. In supply chain management, probably the biggest thing that people forget about is collaboration. We have to talk to each other. So you have shared communications. So This is an example from years ago, from 8 years ago, where one company was negotiating with another. They were having to share sensitive information. You had over 300 employees involved in these negotiations of this needs to be tweaked, that needs to be done. And instead of trying to figure out, okay, what information needs to be deleted when all of a sudden the negotiations fell off and they decided not to do business with each other, it was easier to just go in and wipe the hard drives of all of the employees than risk the fact that somebody might still have something on their computer a year later. So now what do? If things are stored out in the cloud, they're on your laptop, your Palm Top, or whatever, what's going to happen? So with suppliers, you've got to share your software. You've got to share your databases, your point-of-sale systems. We've all seen what happens with that. What'll happen a lot of times with larger networks is that they've secured their network, but they can't secure the subcontractor of the general contractor this way. So general contractor, subcontractor, and on down the line until you get to the mom and pop shop. I'm not blaming it all on mom and pop shops, but you can't be sure that all of their networks are secure as well. So there are a lot of different layers to go through. So what do? How do you mitigate your damages? You've got to create the layers of security. So defense in depth is a concept that's been around for years, but it's not going to go away. You've got to deal with what's right in front of you. You've got to create good policies and procedures and not just create them and put them over here until the auditors and regulatory commission comes by again. You've actually got to follow them. And that's the problem that happens with a lot of companies. They're like, yep, we have all these nice policies and procedures. Can you show where you've actually audited yourself lately? No. So that's got to change. And I forgot to bring this one up. The NICE framework. So who's heard of NICE? Yay. Okay, so this one is so the National Initiative for Cybersecurity Education. If you go out there, it's got a list of jobs by the ton and the skill sets that are needed and how are we going to train the workforce of tomorrow to be able to deal with everything that's coming at us. So October, which we are in right now, is National Cybersecurity Awareness Month. And I like to aim at the elderly and children and actually some adults of when it says stop, think, connect, somebody just wants to join you on Facebook. Do you know who they are? Why do they want to be your friend if you don't know them? You know, and do you really want to connect with them? On LinkedIn, on any of these, what are you after when you're actually signing into these? So let's look at our different types of data loss. We all know about these big data breaches. The credit card clearinghouses are definitely a target. It's convenient. They were talking the other day. We used to always pay cash. You always had, 20 bucks or something in your pocket to buy your soda or whatever when you go into the convenience store. Now everybody pulls out their debit card, or at least a lot of people do. And they want you using their cards. So look at this. 2013, 2,164 separate incidents, over 822 million records. The United States has the highest of the over 1,000 incidents, with 48.7% being here in the United States, are where the data breaches are occurring. And you can go out to that website and take a look at it. So we've got our credit cards. I talked about the hospitals. So what's going on now with hospitals? Who's been to the doctor's office lately? Okay, how many of you are seeing all the wireless setups? Okay, make you feel safe? No. Okay, mobile device management. Which wireless level are you at? I've spoken to some people in hospital IT, and they're like, you've got to have 3 levels of wireless of who you're letting on your network. You don't want visitors on the same wireless, of course, as your crash carts. I love the idea of a wireless crash cart, but I don't want the hacker on there when somebody I love is about to need help. Your devices, they now can hack your pacemaker. Make you feel good? Your medicine dispensers, they're telling you, okay, it's time for your medication. That's all on these nice little devices that are in your hospital rooms now, pardon. a lot of your patient records are online. I think it's really cool that when my doctor was absent, they're like, oh, we can go see this other doctor. And they're like, yeah, you had an appointment with this doctor 7 years ago. Okay, that's good to know. They can pull these things up instead of having someone have to go down to the archives. But that means that all of this is available online. So how well encrypted is it? Who has access to it? Things like that. So these are all part of the things. I put up this. So this is a really cool tool, Digital Evidence Forensic Toolkit. It's Linux-based. You can load this on your thumb drive. So somebody can actually walk up, because physical security is always where you start. They can take their thumb drive, plug it into your machine, launch this, and get your passwords, pull down stuff. It's actually supposed to be by professionally trained forensics experts to actually retrieve things, but anything that can be used for good can be used for evil, of course, or for bad deeds. So this is something that does exist. I want to talk about virtual machines. So I've talked about it being on your thumb drive. So a virtual machine is an operating system that is basically a file on your machine. So this is my Windows machine. And you'll notice that you've got a virtual machine here and then another virtual machine loaded in that one. So that's a Linux box operating inside of a Linux box. And you can load that on your flash drive. So there will be no evidence left that they did anything. So you're going, okay, so why are we worried about this? You now can put virtual machines on your smartphone. And the reason for this is so many companies now have BYOD. Does everybody know what BYOD is? Okay, bring your own device. So you've got people bringing their own device and getting onto your corporate network. Now let's say that there is electronic discovery. So one company sues another. How often does that happen? Oh, never, never, never. Okay, so most of your documents now are electronic. So does that mean we have to examine every single device that you have hooked up to the network? At some corporations, they're like, if you hook it up to our network, we have the right to examine it. But how do you know how many things that they did? So what a few companies have done, so BlackBerry being one and VMware being another, they've created new virtual machines specifically for the smartphones that will only connect to the corporate network. And it keeps your personal things, because think about it, on your smartphone, not only do you have all your corporate stuff, you've got your text messages to your family, to your doctor, to whomever, your online social media, all of that. So now if you have a virtual machine on your smartphone that only connects to the corporate network and keeps all of your stuff segregated, then all they have to grab is that portion of it that applies to the investigation. So that's a cool thing that's coming out. So that's separating your personal data from the corporate data. I always love the Enron case. And it's just because it was public data, it was a public trial, all of those emails were in the public domain and still are. These had people's social security numbers, their birth dates, etc. The group that was handling it about a year ago, so it was EDRM, the Electronic Discovery Reference Management Group, so EDRM.net. They teamed up with a group called Nuix, N-U-I-X, and they went through and they sanitized it. So they took out all of that sensitive information. How long ago was Enron? Not that long ago, so most of those people are still alive. So all of their personal data was sitting out there for all of these years. Yeah, in the public domain. So you have to think about all of that when you're starting to put together databases, what needs to be encrypted, stuff like that. These things need to be looked at. So next thing we get to is social media. I love this one. 1.3 billion on Facebook. Okay. Tracking people on Facebook. I just got through writing a section of a chapter on forensics software for social media. It's out there. It's really cool. I enjoyed creating the exercises for it. There's been a gentleman who was convicted of murder, because he went online on his Facebook and said, hey, me and my bros, we killed this guy the other day. He went to jail. Another young man was accused of assaulting a gentleman. He could prove that he was somewhere else because of what he had posted to his social media. So he was exonerated. So the good part is Facebook and most of your online social media do cooperate with law enforcement, and there are actually forms and things you can fill out to get that information. Twitter, of course, is the one that says, nope, won't do it. So they're still fighting a nice legal battle. What type of social media is on the mobile devices? Do you and your company use social media to communicate, to market to your customers? What's out there? Your Twitter, your all of those. What type of information can people find out about your companies just by looking at the social media? So some other things to look at. This was a hacker scenario from an article that I read that was like, okay, this is scary. In one scenario, they broke into a trucking company, no big deal. Minimal stuff was stolen. They're like, it's a tax write-off. Go call the insurance company, clean up, let's keep moving. What they had actually done was installed spyware on the corporate network. Okay, so it was sending information back to whomever had broken in. Then you look at another scenario. So that social media, you have people that are like, oh, long-haul truckers, they're bored, they're trying to stay in touch with their family, and they happen to friend someone they didn't really know who starts tracking them and going, oh, you're at which rest stop today? Oh, and you're at this rest stop tomorrow? Oh, really? And so they start tracking the people. And so they also try to get passcodes. They know when people are going to be there. This has primarily, so far, only been used for human trafficking in order to locate where the containers were or for people smuggling in things. All right, so drones, home delivery. So if they hack the drones, what's going to happen? They're being used for surveying. I'm not sure if all of you saw, probably about a month ago, where a woman looked out of her living room window here in Seattle and there was a drone looking in her window. There are no laws for that right now. See, I remember we talked about legislation, and it was the building owner who was doing it. You know, he was looking for cracks in the building, but he hadn't warned the people. So imagine drones doing all your air traffic control. So this is off of NASA's website, so that's happening. Here's the Amazon Prime drone. Webcams. These are very convenient. I'm not sure if you saw this one. There were actually nude pictures of her posted because of malware called Blackshades. This had gotten in. It's a remote access tool that someone had used, someone she knew had actually gotten it onto her machine and remotely accessed her webcam. So over 500,000 people worldwide were affected. It took a 2-year operation, international cooperation between law enforcement agencies in order to find all the people involved. So notice you had a Swedish hacker, Alex Ukel, who was apprehended in Moldova. But these things it sells for like $40. You can download this. And it'll access, notice, webcams, hard drives, capture keystrokes, whole 9 yards. This was used for everything from extortion to bank fraud. So there are bad guys out there, and you can look up the item. Let's look now at international groups. So NATO has a cooperative cyber defense center of excellence with over 50 countries that have published a cybersecurity strategy. I remember during my dissertation looking at how many countries actually had forensics procedures for digital evidence set up. A lot of them don't. The International Competition Network, I highly recommend this group. I stumbled over them by mistake. They are to deal with companies trying to put together monopolies. So over 90 jurisdictions are involved in this group. They're put together, the Netherlands Authority for Consumers and Markets, the U.S. Department of Justice, and the German Bundeskartellamt. Can't quite pronounce that. What was that? Who? Thank you. Okay, so they will detect monopolies and cartels. They have procedures for how to go in there and actually do investigations. So these are actual Department of DOJ and similar organizations worldwide going into companies and going, okay, you're in violation of the law. They will get the digital evidence. They have it all set up. They have at least 10 manuals online that you can download. And as I mentioned, over 90 jurisdictions. So let's now look at new technology. So I love Criminal Minds. So that's one of my favorites. And I was watching this one show where the guy had put a webcam inside of someone's eye. It was on, okay, so that one, yeah, it was a repeat. That was actually a repeat. So I was mentioning to someone, they're like, oh, well, but they're doing that research for people with macular degeneration, where they're actually putting a telescope in their eye. So this is actual technology. So you only have to go another little step with nanotechnology to add a webcam to that telescope in their eye. So this is right around the corner. So somebody could be walking around and you don't know anything. They've got a webcam that's being transmitted to who knows who. Then we have all of our wearable technology. You already may have seen it where I think a gentleman was in one of our suburbs walking around with a Google Glass on, and someone's like, take that off. I don't want you recording me. So if somebody's walking around with these, they can be on their computer wearing the Google Glass and transmitting it instead of just looking up things for their own personal use. You don't know that. I love these things. There's now smart jewelry, smart watches, smart rings, smart necklaces. So let's take a look at this. Some of these are really useful. So ring scanners are actually in the market for people who work in warehouses. So they're climbing up on a ladder. They've got this on their ring fingers, and they're just scanning all of the items that are in stock. Isn't that really convenient? It's really cool. Who knows what else they can do with that? This one is from IBM, the jewelry. So think about what makes up your smartphone. So your earrings are your speakers. So that's how you're going to hear. Your necklace is your microphone. The bracelet is the VGA telling you who the caller is, and your ring lets you know that there's an incoming call. Really cool way to communicate with people. So no more, I lost my cell phone. Now you just have to have your jewelry on. And for men, we'll figure out something else. Oh, well, go for it. You don't mind? Okay. Cool. I like it. Okay, so rings. So instead of having to do swipe cards, you put it in the rings that you wear. So, and they're called Java rings because they're done with Java applets. Then, of course, we get down to the fact that your car can definitely be hacked. They are requiring, or they're, I think, somewhere in the next 2 years, all new cars have to have a black box on them. If you're in an accident, it'll record what happens. You know, for your insurance claims. Did you actually step on the gas? Did you actually step on the brake the way you claim? So that'll be on the black box. I'm not sure the black box can do that part of it. Yet. Okay, so automobile cybersecurity. So this is a whole new field. You've got all these wireless connections. I mean, it's convenient. You know, it's cold outside. Let's turn on the car, you know, just by pressing a button. GPS devices. The problem is the hackers can get in there. They can get your personal information off of that because, of course, OnStar or similar type things, if they've got your information to be able to connect to the car, what can the hacker get when they break in? So these things need to be considered. Will they be able to stop your car remotely? Will they be able to, they say, disengage the brakes? Brake failure in this weather? Can you imagine? I know trying to get to work today, I had to slam on the brakes at least 4 times because people forget. And then they could take over steering of your car. So what's happening? General Motors just hired its first cybersecurity officer for products. Do you feel safe now? No. But here's a good thing. So the Alliance of Automobile Manufacturers and the Association of Global Automakers are creating what they're calling an Automobile Information Sharing and Analysis Center for the same thing of what type of cyber hacks are happening to cars in order to share information. So these are the types of things. When I said multidisciplinary and cooperation, that's part of what has to happen. And for my students, I already have to teach them how to be penetration testers for standard computer networks. Imagine having to be a penetration tester for your cars. So it's like, there's a Porsche. I want to see if I can hack into the Porsche. Now, of course, you have the permission of the manufacturer to do this. Just want to clarify that. Then we have the cloud. So everybody's going, okay, it's stored in the cloud. So where exactly is your data? And how many copies of your data exist? Is it local? Is it regional? What type of arrangement was made with that particular company? So like the US government says that everything has to be in the 48 contiguous states if you're in the cloud. Do all the other corporations require that? Maybe not. Your backups might be in Siberia, they might be in Brazil, they might be anywhere. So you just never know. Then we get to this, the Internet of Things and forensics. So I love doing investigations. It used to be, and I was telling a student about this, when I first wrote the first edition back in 2002, we were still dealing with DOS. The book was 450 pages. We're finishing up the 5th edition. It's now about 800 pages. So that's what happened in a decade, a little over a decade. You've got so many multitudes of devices. With the cloud, you're looking at exabytes of data. I mean, you used to just think, just to go through a terabyte, 20 terabytes. So that's what you used to deal with when you had a corporation suing another corporation, or if the Department of Justice was going after a corporation. 20 terabytes was way too much information to have to go through. Now we're dealing with exabytes. So now you're going to be dealing with those big data analytics. They're projecting that the number of devices will be in the trillions, probably in our lifetime. So if we're already going to be at 50 billion by 2020, which is right around the corner, just think about what can happen. Your network boundaries. So are you on your network, but you're in the cloud, but then you're connected to other people? So what one group has proposed is 3 zones. So the zones that you control, the zones that are on your borders, so people that you know that you are definitely in contact with and you have associations with, and then you have the hardware and software that's out of your control. So people that are out on the fringes and you have no idea, no control over those. So that's what I think is coming. How many of you have been to the Emerald Down cybersecurity workshops? Yay! I highly recommend them. They have great information that gets shared. It's really, really fun. And I think I'm just about out of time. Any questions? Oh, yes, sir.
When's the PRCCDC and how can somebody here get involved with that?
Oh, thank you, thank you. Okay.
Leave that right up for you.
I appreciate it.
I
Yeah.
wish you would explain it.
I would indeed. He knows how to pronounce it because he supports us. Okay, so the Pacific Rim Collegiate Cyber Defense Competition is, we're heading into our 7th or 8th year. It'll be March 20th and 21st this year, I believe. So a Saturday, Sunday. It is a 2-day competition. We last year had 12 colleges and universities and 2 high schools. Basically, they are given a, they're told that the entire IT staff was fired. And you walk in, and here's your computer network of a company. Last year, it was a missile designer, which was really hysterical. It was fun. And you've already got malware on your network. You already have systems that are not patched, and you're under attack. And you have to do all these business injects while you're trying to go and make a report to the board of directors, etc. How you all can help us is by being on the white team, being on the red team. White team means that you're a judge, means that you're going to help the students, give them their injects and whatever. Red team means that you are an IT professional and know how to do cyber attacks or penetration testing of networks. We always need more of those. And, or you can be black team and help us with the infrastructure, or donations if you are corporate. So, and then you can also come and just watch. We love visitors. So last year we had an orange team, which was really fun. They got to call up and act like really dumb customers. So, yes, yeah. So, my favorite was actually a graduate of ours. So she would call up and go, "Oh, what color are your socks?" So we called her Creepy Caller because she was into socks. Then she would call up and go, "My husband just died and I need his password." And she actually had people crying and almost ready to give her the password. "My children are starving. We can't get a hold of anything because it's a bank account and blah, blah, blah." So it's a lot of fun. So please come out and help us. Yes, ma'am.
How do the benefits of CISPA compare against the work that the MSISACs are already doing? And I couch that against protecting and safeguarding privacy for citizens.
I honestly have not compared the two. I mean, there are always these new things coming up, and I haven't looked at where one helps more than the other, or where people are even following any of them. Okay, any other questions? All righty, thank you so much.
So our panel was asked that they had a few questions. Did you guys see your questions? No, yes? All right. Well, the basic question that we had presented is, what are the potential impacts of natural disasters and economic disruptions to our supply chain, and how do we build resiliency? So it's that kind of same theme that we have been talking about all day. And so I'm actually going to just let you all introduce yourselves as you talk through and talk to our group about your thoughts on resiliency and preparedness and all that. So, Tony, I'll start with you.
My name is Tony Shipich, and I'm an assistant professor of economics at Central Washington University. And much of my research is on the economic and political impacts of various types of disasters, including earthquakes, fires, pretty much all types of disasters. As a part of my research, I guess I do some of this outreach types of activities. And here I would like to point out what are the most important things from the economics perspective when it comes to both identifying the hazards as well as communicating those hazards to the society, to the public, to the businesses, and so on. So Tim in the earlier panel discussed the identification of these hazards as being one of the most important things. And this really is very important. Why? Because without scientifically examining all the probabilities and likelihoods of certain events happening and analyzing historical data, you're really not going to have much information in making any informed conclusions on how to build the resilient systems of any kinds, including supply chain. So the very basic science has to be there, and more money has to be put towards it. So after we've identified those very basic facts, pretty much on the likelihoods of some hazardous events occurring, what we need to do is be able to estimate economic losses from those hazards in order to prioritize our emergency management procedures on which hazards do we focus. We might have a very high probability of having, let's say, avalanches in middle of nowhere mountains, Washington State. But a high probability doesn't mean that we should necessarily care about those, because they might not in fact impact too many people. So the economic dimension is really, really important. Okay, and supply chain is only one small part of that larger economic dimension. The key to all of this, after the identification of these, potential losses, of historical losses, of the probabilities, and so on, is to inform the society about the hazards, and that's the hard part. And some of you have discussed in the previous panel already how there is already some success in doing so, and absolutely there has been, but we still have a long way of going, especially when it comes to earthquakes, right, that we discussed earlier. People in Washington State are not necessarily perfectly informed of these events because unfortunately it seems like the humans require experiencing the event before they actually do something about this. And this actually has significant impacts on the policy. And if in democracies constituents are not demanding mitigation policies, prevention policies, and so on, well, politicians are going to be rational and not respond because remember, it's a zero-sum game. There is multiple interests going after the same pot of money. And if people are not informed about these events, they're not going to demand them, and therefore we're not going to be properly prepared. There's plenty of evidence that this is the case in the political economy literature. So how does all of this apply specifically to the supply chain risk management that we just discussed earlier? Well, very simply, we just have to identify what is at stake here. What are our most vulnerable parts of infrastructure, right? And then we have to focus on estimating the potential losses. If we figure out what the losses are, and then multiply those losses by the probability of an event occurring, we're going to get pretty much an estimate of how much money we should be putting in towards this, right? And this is that benchmark that we were talking about earlier, that we should really compare our representatives against. Why didn't you put this much money? Because this is what the risk managers are telling you to do. This is what economists are telling you to do. And then, you know, this is something that might potentially be a solution to some of these issues. Anyways.
Hello, I'm Jennifer Lipton, and I'm in the Department of Geography at Central Washington University in Ellensburg. And as a geographer, my focus is on a couple different aspects. And at Central Washington University, I'm proud to say that we are the one university that offers a Bachelor of Science in Environmental and Resource Management and a Bachelor of Science in Geographic Information Systems Science. And this is where understanding preparedness and thinking about resiliency, I'd like to focus my comments in the sense of preparedness of training and having people aware of skills and tools that they could use in an applied setting for disaster management. So GIS, geospatial sciences, using technologies such as mapping, remote sensing software, and technologies for getting information quick, having access to open data, and Dr. Phillips' talk was very interesting and fits right up the alley of discussing this as well, making sure that data sources are up to date so that people within local governments or working at universities, students who are working in internships or training on how to use these technologies have data sets that they could map out road networks that can get merchandise as well as any type of hazard management to the places that need to be immediately. Those are really critical, important assets that we have within the field of geography. And training students and having them be able to map and use that technology takes a lot of time. It also it is one thing that people are interested in having access to is these maps of how to get these maps, how they can create them within their companies themselves so that they can have rapid mapping and capabilities of reaching a certain demographic. That type of information is available in GIS and geospatial sciences. And so I really, as preparedness, I see this is a really critical need is making sure that we have the technical capabilities of training our students, training people in government institutions, at a county, at other user levels to make sure that they have access to this information, making sure that they can get the most up-to-date data that can then be put into some type of mapping software that is easy to use and to create the types of spatial references that are required for global supply chain management to make sure that people are going to have emergency management needed when they have it, having proper mapping of infrastructure and getting that done quickly and easily without having any type of overlap or problems because of poor data sets that are available or just the incapacity to use the software or access to the software. So I feel that that is one of the key things that is needed is increased training and increased access to those types of data sets. And in terms of building resilience, I believe that having the importance of social networks and social capacity was echoed earlier in the talks this morning, making sure that people have the community networks that they know that they could rely upon going to the university, going to the community organizations that are going to be properly informed with this type of spatial data is also very critical. And so it will help improve the capacity to handle emergencies as well as the capabilities of resolving any types of vulnerabilities that may be out there in the future.
Howdy. My name is Carlos Smith. I chair the Department of Finance and Supply Chain Management at Central Washington. I also am director for our Supply Chain Management Institute at CWU. So first thing I wanted to ask, how many of you guys are involved in supply chain related activities? Okay. How many of you are in the insurance industry? Yeah. There's not too many people here from the insurance industry. That would be an interesting industry to pay attention to because they do an awful lot of research in this area. Not necessarily some of the primary insurance companies, but a lot of the reinsurers, the Zurichs of the world and things like that. Why? Because they're the guys that have to insure these companies that are running these supply chains or organizations that are running these supply chains to do business. So it's in their best interest, obviously, to understand what the potential ramifications are of each of these things. So I've done a couple of talks on this, and I was just looking back. There's a report out by the Business Continuity Institute, and it was talking about the most common supply chain disruptions, okay? And they had a report out in 2011, and the top one was really weather, then followed by IT outage, okay? Followed by transit networks, actually earthquakes. This was, not too far around the Fukushima occurrence, so that was kind of on everybody's mind. Outsourcing, and cyber attack was kind of down towards the bottom. Now that was 2011, right? In 2013, in terms of the proportion, it went about the same. IT outage showed up a little bit more on top, adverse weather, outsourcing failures, transportation, cyber attack, and then earthquake. Now in 2013, they measured it in terms of very severe versus somewhat severe and things like that. So it's a little bit different here. In 2011, it was 8% of people indicated that cyber attack was a factor. In 2013, it was 30% said dramatic, and 51% said overall. So obviously, we're seeing those things occur more and more frequently. And it certainly is, when we do our work and our teaching, our work with industry, it tends to be more business oriented. We aren't talking as much about the public industry factors. I mean, most of our stuff comes in from the business industry, the Boeings of the world, the PACCARs, the places like that. Supply chain is kind of a good area to be in for this, and probably is a good area to focus on these things, because if you think about it, the origins of this, there's many different ways to define a supply chain. In fact, there's a lot of different universities like ours that have programs, and we all probably have each our own definition, but more and more what we're seeing is that it's kind of an orientation towards business. It's a systems orientation towards business. So that people understand, that get degrees in this area, that when I turn something here, it could affect something somewhere else. And so, for example, I used to be in industry, and I worked for a company called West Marine, and I was a director of inventory. And inventory would show up on my receiving dock from a company, a supplier. It would be not what we ordered. okay? If it's not what we ordered, it couldn't be received into our system. Our accounting people had to get back in touch with their accounting people to work out all that different stuff so that we could receive it, so that then we could send it to our customers. Now, the longest lead time for that particular product could be that time sitting on our dock. And why is that? It's because we aren't aware of these little things that happen between the different parts of the organization. So for example, when we talk to students, all of our students take an intro supply chain course. And one thing I try to point out to them, I don't care if you're in finance, I don't care if you're in marketing, I don't care if you're in real estate. You have to have some perspective that the decisions you're making are going to impact somewhere else, somebody else in that organization, and perhaps somebody else in a different organization that you guys work with. So when we see these opportunities come up, the other interesting thing about supply chain in terms of looking at the economic impact, a lot of what supply chain analysts do is look at risk and try to assess risk. And on a small scale, risk could be, what's the chances that I'm going to be out of stock when you walk into the grocery store and you're looking for a certain type of toilet paper and it's not on the shelf? Little risk for us, big risk for you, because everybody likes their own toilet paper. But that's very on the small. But there are ways to look at that. And at the same time, there are ways to start looking at these bigger risks that say, what happens if I'm an automotive manufacturing company and I'm sole sourcing particular parts out of Japan, and they have this dramatic event that occurs. I think what happened with that particular case with Fukushima is it started to make everybody aware of what the potential implications are. When people in our area, an activity in supply chain known as purchasing, right, deals a lot with these sort of things, they have to look at all the products, if I'm a manufacturing company, all the products that go into that car I make or that airplane I make, and they have to look at those and say, which ones of these products are most critical to me to put this plane together? Because there are some, probably some of the computer systems and stuff that are very critical. So you have to. What do I do? Do I want to sole source that? I don't think, personally, I don't know everybody's political opinions on this. From a business standpoint, it probably makes a little bit of sense for Boeing to have some facilities in South Carolina, quite honestly. Because if there ever were a catastrophic event here, there's opportunities to be resilient down there, right?
Right.
And so that gets away from some of those political issues that deal with it. So what I'm suggesting overall with this is that, we've been dealing in the supply chain area with issues of risk and trying to assess risk for a while. The fortunate thing about bringing this to light within this domain is that this is also an area where companies in general, where the emphasis has been more and more on breaking the silos and being able to communicate across people in our organization and across our organizations with other organizations. That's the nature of this stuff. And more frequently, when we can team up like with the guys in geography and geology and different areas like that, we can start to build models, crude as sometimes they may be, that help us put our hands around some of these dollars. And the dollars are a little bit different when you're talking about broader economics. The broader economic impacts can be severe. Unfortunately, you or I, we don't have our own little model, and we have to rely on companies. They certainly have an interest in all this as well. So that's where I'll leave it for right now.
My name is Walter Saliga. I'm a seismologist and a geodesist at Central Washington University. I feel like sort of what I do is so low level when it comes to resiliency that a lot of people just don't think about it. How many people looked at the weather this morning on the computer before they left? Yeah, almost everybody, right? What goes into actually doing that? You could drill down on the National Weather Service page and read a report from the guy in Pendleton or the guy at Seattle or the girl who was in Portland, Oregon, who looked at all those models and interpreted that and put that 60% chance of rain on there. But behind all that, there's satellites that get built. There's all sorts of infrastructure behind that, and somebody's got to pay for that. So we were very fortunate in the last 10 years that there was this big boom of technology. We can actually position the Earth, like places on the Earth, to within a millimeter. We can install seismic instruments and have them stream across the mountains on their own separate wireless networks. But that all costs money to put in. that money was originally footed by the National Science Foundation. So the National Science Foundation said, this is really great, this is innovative science. National Science Foundation funds brand new science. Now it's been on the ground for 10 years. People still have to go out and make sure that radios work, that batteries aren't dead. When instruments break, you gotta go out and bring a new one. National Science Foundation is no longer interested in actually funding this anymore. And so these are meetings that are happening this year. In the next 5 years, the instruments that we use to make the earthquake models and to assess resilience after an earthquake, it doesn't have to happen here in Washington State. If you have an earthquake in California, we in Washington State can learn something from that by the data that's recorded from instruments down there, the seismometers and the GPS instruments. But if 5 years from now, this gets dropped all the way to the floor and nobody wants to pay for it anymore, we won't have them anymore. This is the same as deciding as a country that we really don't care that much about spending that much money on another satellite for weather. We won't be able to check the weather. Yeah, we can look outside and say, oh yeah, it's not raining or it's raining. But a week from now, we won't know what's happening. It's gonna happen. You know, it's gonna rain, it's gonna snow, and so we can always just wait and find out. And that's sort of the situation that we'd be left with. And we almost came and touched on this subject when Tim was up here earlier on, but you know, we didn't quite get to it. That as part of this resilience, we also have to fund networks that keep providing the raw basic data so that we can run our models and see what the possible things are. We need meteorologic data so that we can actually see, you know, are there large storms coming to the coast? Are there large waves coming? Is it going to snow like crazy? Are we going to end up having conditions that set up landslides? We also need to be able to measure the motion of the ground, whether it's the dynamic motion during an earthquake or the permanent motion that happens after the after the dynamic waves have settled down. We need to have that initial data so we can put it into our models so we can actually predict forward and say, what's the chances that this bridge or that bridge are going to fall down? Mike, Tim.
Well, that last note of not investing in the long-term maintenance.
That was sort of the topic that came up is
Yeah.
just nobody wants to invest on things until they break. And nobody notices that things are missing until they're not there. Everyone has come to rely on this data over the last 10 years.
That goes back to Eric's, what was it?
Fix on failure.
Fix on failure. I'm going to carry that away. I've written it down several times, and I have to get fix on failure. So, yeah, and that's the same approach we take with all of our infrastructure, including our aging water supply systems and et cetera, so. Questions for this panel? We're going to bring our other panels up.